have so much vaccine production. But the fact is that there are so many countries which don't have this facility and which are not able to buy or, stockpile these vaccines in their countries, a lot of poor countries. And the fact that, it is documented that, for instance, the US and the EU have taken these kind of vaccine quantities in advance is rather worrying for smaller countries. If you buy up all the vaccine quantities for the next 6 months, then poorer countries can only start vaccination probably by the end of 2021. So this is something rather unequal, and I think something needs to be done about it.
Yeah, Ralph, what's your assessment of how the global effort to try to make sure there is some equitable distribution of the vaccine is going?
Well, I don't think it's going very well at all, and I don't think it will go very well. To the point that was just made, yes, India has a great manufacturing capability. Canada does as well. It doesn't mean those drugs are staying in the country. They're being manufactured here, but they've already been bought by other countries, by facilities, or by people. If there's more profit in putting it on a boat or a ship and getting... The obvious question, should governments around the world have a coordinated research function for pandemics and for situations like this? Because the amount of money that governments around the world put towards creating the vaccines was enormous. And if we could put all that money together and do something that's good for the population of the world, and maybe using tax money for just these very specific drugs. I'm not saying for every drug. I'm just saying for these worldwide problematic drugs. Then maybe we could have got here faster, and we could have guaranteed a more equitable distribution instead of having for-profit organizations deciding who is more worthy of a vaccine.
So you're saying then that these companies that have developed and are producing the vaccines should not be able to make a profit in this pandemic?
I do believe they should be able to make a profit on the drugs that are not going to save the world. We have a global problem here. We have millions of people who are dying, and with a disease that could destroy the global economy if of course it already hasn't. That can be dealt with developing a new tablet for a headache. That's a different thing. Yes, they should be making money on those types of things, but this is a global problem and it should have a global solution.
Now, Canada has today become the third country to approve the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. The UK and Bahrain had done so previously. When will it start being injected into people's arms in Canada?
It's a very good question, and we don't have we've had lots of people give us lots of different answers, but it looks like it's going to be within a couple of weeks because we've bought an enormous amount. And to that point, as a matter of fact, I think that there's going to be 4 or 5 companies that are going to get very, very rich off of this, but there's going to be hundreds of other pharmaceutical companies that aren't, and we shouldn't put them all into the same camp of people who are trying to take advantage of COVID.
Sushma, when might approvals be given in India for people to receive vaccines there?
Well, the 2 companies or 3 companies, I think, including Pfizer, have just applied to be a regulator over here. And the talks are still going on with them. I think that they will take a little while to give their approval. They are asking them for more information. That's the latest news. But there is an expectation that probably by January, we should have some vaccines available to be rolled out in this country.
Now, we've been talking about the equitable distribution of vaccines globally, but is there concern that within India, perhaps the rich could be inoculated and the poor may miss out? Because there has been talk that some of the vaccines could perhaps be sold privately in India.
Well, there has been talk about that. Yes, I mean, one really doesn't know what's going to happen. As of now, the plan for the rollout, which has been announced by the government, is that, first of all, it's going to be the 10 million, healthcare workers, and then another 20 million frontline workers, which includes people in the army, disaster relief, and paramilitary organizations, things like that. And then another 260 million people who are over the age of 50. Now that is the rollout plan. But of course, what you're talking about is something apart from that people who are influential, people who are rich, would try and corner these vaccines. Now, this is something that one cannot foresee. But in a country with such huge inequities like India, I would say it is indeed possible. But one really doesn't know.
Ralph, do you know whether the vaccines will be available privately in Canada or whether people will have to get them through some kind of public authority?
It is. We have a public healthcare system. It has to go through a public authority.
But there are private healthcare providers as well.
There certainly are, but they're not going to get this because it's actually going through the government. The government is the one that bought it to go through our provincial services, and that is the plan. But
so the rich can't jump the queue in Canada?
Well, I didn't say that. There is that possibility. But I can guarantee you that the outcry over something like that would be so great, that there would be not enough resources to go after these people. It is a very dangerous game if they try to jump the queue. And I think that a lot of people are just going to sit there and wait for it because, quite frankly, we don't need 100% inoculation to sort of stem the risks. We need a great percentage. So it'll get easier as more people get it.
You're listening to Business Matters on the BBC World Service. In India, farmers in recent weeks have been protesting against the government. That's the sound of a demo in Delhi on Tuesday. Farmers are angry at government plans to reform agriculture, as we have been discussing on the programme a few times in recent months. The farmers fear that they could lose out to large corporations. Sushma, how disruptive were those recent protests?
Well, for me sitting here in Delhi, it's not been very disruptive. Uttar Pradesh. So people coming from Uttar Pradesh are having a problem. But yes, they are threatening to extend it to the streets of Delhi because there's a standoff in the negotiations with the government. The government is rigid on they're prepared to offer some concessions, but these concessions are not acceptable to the farmers who simply want repeal of the 3 farm laws which have brought in these reforms.
So very simply, just explain how the planned laws could change farming.
Well, first of all, we do have a system of marketing, of what they call agricultural produce marketing committees, APMCs, and in most states. And in the past, farmers could only sell their products in these markets. The new law allows the farmer to sell his products outside these markets, these fixed markets, where they have to pay a huge commission to middlemen who are known as artiyas and who are very, very powerful, especially in the Punjab. So this is actually freeing up the farmer from just having to go to the particular mandi. They can go directly to any buyer in the market and sell. The second thing is that they can sell to businesses. That is, they can enter into contract farming. And the third is something that doesn't even have anything to do with the farmers. It allows traders to stock large quantities of essential commodities. The thing is that this essential commodities law was brought in, but there was an era of shortages, and they were trying to prevent people from hoarding. So this is to meet the new situation where we have a situation of surpluses.
Okay. So farmers are worried, though, aren't they, that it's going to be the little guy in negotiations with a big, say, supermarket chain, and that this is going to drive down prices and they're going to be left out of pocket.
Yes. Now, their fear is that the government fixes every year what is known as a minimum support price for purchase, especially of wheat and rice, but other commodities also. And their fear is that the government will do away with them and then leave them at the mercy of the private sector and do away with these markets. But the fact is that none of these laws say that the MSP or the minimum support price will be done away with, or that the markets will be abolished. So that's actually a fear psychosis, a great apprehension, largely in the minds of the farmers of Punjab and Haryana, who have been the beneficiaries of this MSP system for decades. And we have to remember, though this has got a lot of publicity internationally and domestically, Punjab's farmers constitute 1.09 million out of the 149 million farmers in India. So there's a whole range, millions of farmers who are not affected by this. But of course, their interests need to be taken into account.
Well, Ralph, Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, weighed in on this recently, didn't he? Particularly when it came to the protests, saying that Canada will always defend the right of peaceful protest, and India hit back and said he was ill-informed. It's interesting, Ralph, isn't it, how this is having an impact right around the world. In central London on Sunday, there were protests here about it.
Oh, yes, and I understand that there were some protests here in Canada as well in support. First of all, farmers and Canadians, farmers they're up there with like almost gods, as it were. They have a tremendous amount of respect, but they also get a tremendous amount of money from the government in subsidies. And they don't want that to change. And any organization or any place in the world where we're seeing that kind of change in farming practices is always a concern to local farmers, not just here in Canada, but also in the US and a few other places. So yes, there's plenty of support, and we'll always keep an eye on the people who create one thing that we absolutely need: food.
Indeed, we do need it. Right now, one of the greatest Christmas songs ever.
It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas everywhere you go. Take a look in the 5 and 10, glistening once again, with candy canes and silver lanes aglow.
A bit of classic Bing Crosby Christmas music there, and it's certainly beginning to look a lot like Christmas in cities around the world. Trees have been decorated, fairy lights have been hung in windows. There are some twinkling away next to me right now. But in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, the city authorities seem to have had enough of the electric festive decorations. They're planning to bring in a rule to limit how many Christmas lights people can put on the exterior of their homes. Jelmer Visser is a reporter for the Dutch website New News and has been telling me about the new rules.
They thought that would be too American-like. We have some American influences with the media and stuff, and decorating your house during Christmas time is one of those things as well. And the city wanted to protect the living conditions of everyone, so they took some guidelines for making it. People have to apply for a permit to decorate.
So what is allowed and what is not allowed then?
In Amsterdam, Christmas decorations is okay, but it has to meet certain guidelines. It can't be too extravagant. It needs to be less than 1 square meter tall. Or when it's less than 10% of the house decorated, then a permit isn't needed.
Right, so if you decorate more than 10% of the front of your home, you need to apply to the city authorities for a permit?
Yeah, you do.
And how much will this permit cost?
Well, it's actually free, but they want to monitor the Christmas carnival by having some government interference with it.
There are things allowed in Amsterdam that aren't in a great many cities, such as cannabis cafes, public prostitution. Do Amsterdammers think it is a little odd that it is Christmas lights that the authorities are going after?
Yeah, actually, they don't have a problem with just red lights, but any other color of the rainbow needs a permit.
What do people make of it, though?
Well, they're actually quite angry because a tradition has been swept away by a police state. They consider it mostly a bad plan, and they don't like it because they want to have the freedom to decorate their house in the Dutch tradition, which is actually an American tradition. Do
you think people are going to apply for permits, or will many people, do you think, perhaps just ignore this and put up the lights that they want to?
Well, it's actually a very Dutch thing to do. We tend to make arguments about anything, being angry all the time and complain a lot. But when the rules are actually applied, they will act according to the rules. But first, we are very loud at making sure that everyone hears we're not okay with it.
Jelmer Visser there in the Netherlands. Ralph, have you got some lights up?
I don't, but you know what? I have a neighbor 2 doors down that has an excess of lights. There seems to be one in every
An excess of lights.
My experience. Oh, yes, because right now I'm looking out the window. It's dark out. We have no lights. I can see the glow of his house, and it's about 100 meters down the road, but I can still see the glow of his house.
Do you like it?
No, I don't. I like him. He's a great guy, and it's fantastic. It's something he does, but you know what? Why not? It's his thing. It's just no one's going to decide what is in good taste and what is bad taste. That's a personal decision, and he's going to do what he's going to do. And you know what? That's fine. It's just fun for a few weeks every year. It's no big deal.
Sushma, it was Diwali recently, the Festival of Lights. Have you still got any lights up?
Yes, we do outside the door, but we don't light them up every day. Probably we light them up again nearer to Christmas, or in between Diwali and Christmas also there are a few Indian festivals, so we have lit them up on those days. But our entire housing complex is festooned with lights, of course, depending on who's interested. And people tend to keep, there are a lot of lights, of course, on Diwali all over the city, but people tend to keep them up right up to Christmas, because Christmas is also celebrated here. And generally, maybe sometimes right up to New Year. So
but you're not offended by all of the lights on your building?
No, not at all. It's fun, I think. It's a nice thing. It's festive.
All right. Sushma Ramachandran, Raul Silva, thanks very much for your time, for your insights on this edition of Business Matters. That is it for this programme. We are back at the same time tomorrow. Do join us then. Bye-bye.
This is the BBC World Service. Now here's something to think about.
I'm David Edmonds, and in The Big Idea, I'll be examining new research all linked to life in the city.
They were asking, what do Japanese police officers need more of? And we were all guessing, do they need higher pay or more vacation time? And it turns out they need more crime.
I found some of the most fascinating ideas around and the people who thought them up.
The Big Idea, Sunday at 3 and 14 GMT. And in 30 minutes, assignment.
The recent brutal war in Nagorno-Karabakh in the Caucasus claimed thousands of lives, both Armenian and Azeri, but did it also kill hundreds of Syrians as well? Today we're hearing the stories of Syrian men who say they were secretly hired to fight on the front line.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
It's 2 o'clock GMT, and this is the newsroom from the BBC World Service. I'm Emilio San Pedro. Facebook could be forced to sell WhatsApp and Instagram in 2 of the most significant U.S. lawsuits against the firm to date.
For nearly a decade, Facebook has used its dominance and monopoly power to crush smaller rivals and snuff out competition.
Also, Hunter Biden, the son of the U.S. president-elect, says he's the focus of a federal tax inquiry. Britain and the EU remain in an impasse over the latest attempts in Brussels to seal a post-Brexit deal failed to produce the desired result. We hear evidence that Syrian mercenaries fought in the recent conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh.
The fighting was really hard. They were well-trained soldiers, positioned on the mountains, and we were down on the desert land. Death was all around us.
And how sniffer dogs in Australia are helping ecologists count endangered koalas. That's all after the news.
Hello, I'm David Harper with the BBC News. Regulators in the United States are suing Facebook, saying the company is abusing its dominance in social media to crush smaller competitors. Antitrust officials have called for Facebook to be broken up. Here's our North America tech reporter, James Clayton.
This lawsuit was expected this week, but few thought it would be this punchy. The Federal Trade Commission thinks Facebook has become too big, too much of a monopoly. That when Facebook bought Instagram in 2012 and WhatsApp in 2014, it was in fact buying up the competition. The Federal Trade Commission believes that these acquisitions were illegal, that they gave Facebook an unfair and anti-competitive advantage. Facebook denies this, saying it bought the two companies when they were far smaller, also citing the fact that the Commission had previously approved the two deals.
Britain and the European Union have agreed to continue trying to reach a post-Brexit trade deal for a few more days. After face-to-face talks between the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, both sides said large gaps remained between them. Kevin Connolly reports.
There was no joint news conference, just diplomatic euphemisms from either side. Frank, said British sources. Lively and interesting was the European version. Mr. Johnson said he didn't want any route to a possible deal to be left untested. There was, it seems, no breakthrough, but there was an agreement to put the negotiators back to work once again to see if a deal might yet be done. A decision is promised by the end of the weekend, but whether that's the last deadline or just the latest deadline remains to be seen.
The electoral authorities in Ghana have declared that President Nana Akufo-Addo has won a second term after securing more than 51% of the vote in Monday's election. He defeated his long-term rival John Mahama, who has complained of vote rigging after securing 47%. Mr. Mahama's National Democratic Congress has rejected the result and says it will appeal against it. The BBC's Thomas Nardi reports.
Supporters of Nana Akufo-Addo have been celebrating following the announcement of the election results. The elections were tightly contested and peacefully conducted, despite a handful of incidents. The turnout was high, and local election monitors have said that the elections were held in accordance with the laws of the country. The re-elected government will have to deal with the high unemployment rates and a struggling economy.
The United States has recorded more than 3,000 deaths from the coronavirus in the past 24 hours, the highest so far in a single day anywhere in the world. The latest landmark came as coronavirus cases continue to explode throughout America, with more than 200,000 daily cases reported through most of December. Hospitals in various parts of the country are filling up. World news from the BBC. The US President-elect Joe Biden's son Hunter has said he's under investigation for potential tax violations. In a statement released by the presidential transition team, Hunter Biden said he took the matter very seriously, but was confident a review would demonstrate that he'd handled his affairs legally. He said he was informed of the investigation by the US Attorney's Office in the state of Delaware. The Saudi-led coalition fighting in Yemen says it has destroyed 2 bomb-laden boats south of the Red Sea. The coalition said the vessels were launched from the Yemeni city of Hodeidah by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels. The Organization of American States has approved a resolution rejecting the result of Sunday's parliamentary elections in Venezuela. The OAS said the vote wasn't free or fair. Our America's editor, Leonardo Rocha, reports.
The OAS said the election was an attempt by the illegitimate regime of President Nicolás Maduro to consolidate a dictatorship in Venezuela. His Socialist Party has regained control of the National Assembly despite a very low turnout of about 30%. The OAS was never expected to approve Sunday's parliamentary elections, which were boycotted by the main opposition parties. But the language used was stronger than expected. President Maduro is unlikely, however, to be shaken by the criticism. He's optimistic about the prospect of rebuilding relations with the US once Joe Biden takes office next month.
The former Italian international footballer Paolo Rossi has died at the age of 64 after a long illness. He was one of the stars of the Italian team that won the 1982 World Cup. He was the competition's top scorer and was given the Golden Ball Award for Best Player of the tournament. Rossi, who had a successful career at Juventus, nearly missed the World Cup after being banned from football for 2 years for his involvement in a match-fixing scandal. After a poor start, Rossi put 3 goals past Brazil in the quarter-finals. BBC News.
Hello, you're listening to The Newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Emilio Sampedro. To some, Facebook, the world's largest social media network, is a fantastic corporate success story. Its products, which include Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, and Instagram, are used by over 3 billion people a month. That's almost half of the world's population. But to others, Facebook is a digital monopoly that's stifling competition. U.S. federal regulators and more than 45 state prosecutors have just launched 2 of the most significant lawsuits against Facebook to date. The cases claim the firm took illegal actions to buy up its rivals and could force Facebook to sell off Instagram and WhatsApp. The New York State Attorney General, Letitia James, is leading the legal fight by the states.
For nearly a decade, Facebook has used its dominance and monopoly power to crush smaller rivals and snuff out competition, all at the expense of everyday users. They've reduced choices for consumers. They stifled innovation, and they degraded privacy protections for millions of Americans.
From California, our technology correspondent James Clayton told me more about the lawsuits.
So what they're accusing Facebook of is something very specific, which is 2 deals in which they acquired 2 companies. One of them was Instagram in 2012. One of them was WhatsApp in 2014. Specifically, what they're saying is that they deliberately targeted those companies because they saw them as a threat, and essentially that they were buying up the competition. So in 2012, Instagram was growing massively. It had really killed it in terms of their sort of mobile offering, and Facebook were a bit behind the curve. And so Facebook decided, rather than compete with the competition, that they'd buy it. And once again with WhatsApp, once again in 2014, it was doing incredibly well. It had 200, 300, 400 million users. Facebook has a very popular messaging app, but WhatsApp is clearly a threat to that. Facebook bought it. And sort of where Facebook is now is if you look at the top 6 messaging and social media companies in the world in terms of monthly users, Facebook owns 4 of them. Facebook itself, Facebook messaging, WhatsApp, and Instagram. All of them, each one individually, has more than 1 billion monthly users. So what these states are saying, what this commission is saying, is Facebook is monopolistic. It's a bully. It owns too much of this sector. And when it can't compete, it just buys up the competition. And it's saying that it did that in those 2 cases illegally.
And what's Facebook's defense against these accusations?
So Facebook's defense, I quite like, because they've taken real umbrage to this, as you can imagine if someone's saying, we want to split you up. Their main issue is that the commission that looks into whether should be approved has already approved these 2 deals. They approved the deal in 2012 with Instagram and the 2014 WhatsApp deal. So what they're saying is, you're trying to retrospectively punish us. They're also saying that when they bought these companies, so they bought Instagram for $1 billion, it was a tiny company. What they're saying is, don't punish us for building up these companies into strong American companies. And you can't, this is literally what the words that they use in their press release, revisionist history, that they're going back to a time when they made a decision 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago and trying to reverse that decision. They say that there's no legal precedent for that, and they're pretty confident of winning.
James Clayton. The presidential election in the U.S. may be over, but it seems President-elect Joe Biden's son, Hunter, a regular target of Republican attacks during the election campaign, is going to stay in the news. Hunter Biden has confirmed that he's under investigation for potential federal tax violations. Our Washington correspondent, Nomia Iqbal, joins us now for more on this. Nomia, who's investigating Hunter Biden and what are the allegations?
So these are prosecutors from Delaware, which is Joe Biden's home state. And as you mentioned there, Hunter Biden's been a focus of attack for the Republicans and Donald Trump throughout the campaign trail. They've been trying to paint Mr. Biden's son as corrupt, but there's never really been any evidence to back any of these claims. Having said that, the tax investigation is not entirely surprising because there had been hints that this was going to happen even back in 2018. We understand that investigators are looking into whether Hunter Biden and his associates violated tax and money laundering laws in business dealings in foreign countries, mainly in China. Hunter Biden has released a statement, and in it says he acted legally and appropriately.
Now, since it's being led by a U.S. attorney who would work for the Department of Justice, there are those claiming that these investigations are political. Are they? And can they harm Joe Biden's presidency?
At the moment, they are political. And of course, this is coming 5 days before the Electoral College formally declares Joe Biden the winner of the election. I think we've still got to see how those 2 crucial Senate races turn out in January in Georgia. So if the Republicans maintain control of the Senate, I think we can safely say there'll definitely be hearings into Hunter Biden's finances. And then if there are any charges, that means it will go from being political to legal, which will, of course, be a huge headache for Joe Biden as he enters the White House. What's really interesting, though, is that the U.S. attorney behind the investigation is a veteran prosecutor. And even though he was appointed by Donald Trump, he's also worked under the Obama administration as well. So I think it's going to be very hard for Trump's critics to say that he's just trying to get some of revenge and make life harder for Joe Biden when he becomes president.
Okay, and this is proof, isn't it, though, that Joe Biden, he's not even yet in the hot seat, as it were, in the White House. He's not. In fact, Mr. Trump is still saying he's still maintaining that he won. He's not even there yet, and he's already under lots of scrutiny.
Yeah, real taste of things to come. And it's, certainly when it comes to Hunter Biden, who is his troubled son, his, tumultuous life is very much played out in public. He's long lived in the shadow of his older brother, Beau Biden, who died in 2015. Real kind of golden child for Joe Biden. And, Joe Biden was targeted by Trump and his allies when he was a candidate. We can expect that to be ramped up when he's actually the president. But I think Joe Biden is aware of this scrutiny. He gave an interview last week to an American network, and he basically said that he wouldn't influence decisions by the Justice Department, which is in contrast to Donald Trump, who's been accused of trying to do that. He said it's the People's Justice Department, and he also went on to say that the department will have independent capacity to decide who gets prosecuted and who doesn't. But yes, I think this is a real sign that, Joe Biden is going to get even more attention once he's in the White House, and especially when you've got a president, President Trump, who still refuses to acknowledge his defeat in the election.
Indeed. Nobia Iqbal, thank you. Another day and another set of crucial talks between the UK and EU to try to secure a post-Brexit trade deal. Much of the attention recently has been on fishing rights, and so it was appropriate that the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, ate a dinner of steamed fish as they tried to break the impasse. Both sides have said negotiations will continue until Sunday, when further decisions will be made on the future of the talks. Mrs. von der Leyen said the discussions had been lively, but conceded they remain far apart, a sentiment echoed by a British spokesperson who said very large gaps remain. Our political editor Laura Kunsberg assesses where Wednesday's developments leave the negotiations.
If at first you don't succeed, you can try and try, but eventually, sometimes, failure is what follows. That now seems the likely outcome of months of talks designed to create a smooth path for the country towards a different future. A deal that, in theory, would ease the junction from membership of a huge trading bloc to a world outside. There is a chance still that a couple of frantic days could result in a change. The Prime Minister could decide, after all, that the potential compromises didn't come. The only agreement was on when they might call a halt. For the first time in a world of highly movable deadlines, they announced that a final decision on the talks must be taken by the end of the weekend. Both sides want to stick to their principles, but that determination right now has set them on the path to the practical outcome they both wanted to avoid. And if nothing changes, that means the chance of significant disruption, at least in the short term, in so many different ways.
Laura Kunsberg, you're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. Now, David has the headlines.
US regulators have launched a major lawsuit against Facebook, accusing it of buying WhatsApp and Instagram to stifle competition. Joe Biden's son Hunter has said he's under investigation for potential tax violations, but is confident he's done nothing wrong. And Britain and the EU have agreed to carry on talking for a few more days about a post-Brexit trade deal, but they say there's still a big gap between them.
Thanks, David. The 6-week war in Nagorno-Karabakh appears to have settled uneasily into peace following the Russia-brokered deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But the scars remain deep. Officially, the conflict claimed more than 5,000 lives, and questions remain over reports that Azerbaijan may have used hundreds of Turkish-backed Syrian fighters in its war effort. Azerbaijan and its state ally Turkey have always denied these claims, but the evidence behind them seems to be growing. The BBC's Ed Butler reports.
I am from Hama province. I have 3 children. Like all Syrians, my financial situation is dire. We'll take anything just to survive.
This is one of 4 Syrian men I tracked down through a variety of contacts. All of them say they fought as soldiers in Azerbaijan's territorial war. I can't tell you their names. They say they'd be in danger if identified.
Well, they told us our mission would be to serve as sentries on the border, as peacekeepers. They offered $2,000 a month. It felt like a fortune to us.
If it seemed too good to be true, well, it was. All of the men I spoke to were hired before there even was a war. None expected to find themselves thrown straight into battle.
The fighting was really hard. They were well-trained soldiers, positioned on the mountains, and we were down on the desert land. I didn't expect to survive. Death was all around us.
You know, the way they were recruited just demonstrates to what an extent they really are used as cannon fodder.
That's Elizabeth Turkoff from the Center for Global Policy in Washington, D.C.
Syrians, they are not good fighters. At the end of the day, they're militia groups, you know. They are essentially just people to whom you can strap a Kalashnikov and told, go capture that forest.
Alhamdulillah. Ya Rab Sallam. Ya Rab Sallam. Ya Rab Sallam.
The bombardment in the early days was intense, and the men told me they were left largely to fend for themselves. This video, posted in early October, shows a soldier on the front line. He's been independently identified as a member of the Al-Hamza division from the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army. You can hear the terror in his voice.
Allahu Akbar. Asad Hanif. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
Most of the wounded could have been saved. There was just no medical support. People were hit and just left to bleed. One time, a mortar shell landed near us. I had to carry this guy who was wounded up to the road. An Azeri tank drove up and just ran over him in front of me and kept going. It was unbelievable. He died right there in front of me. This scene, I see it every day in my dreams.
Estimates vary, but it's thought that 1 in 10, maybe more, of the Syrians who travelled to Azerbaijan died there. After just 3 days, hundreds had laid down their weapons. They simply refused to fight. A standoff ensued, and eventually they were transported home through Turkey, although they were deprived of any of the pay that they'd been promised. The men's stories I heard were compelling and consistent. They sent us photos showing their Azeri-marked uniforms and even the specific military building that they were housed in. Despite the considerable evidence, though, both the Azeri government and Turkey deny the men's existence.
Ed Butler, and you can hear more of his report into Syria Soldiers of Fortune in this week's edition of Assignment here on the BBC World Service. A test launch for a new SpaceX rocket has ended in a spectacular and destructive fireball as the unmanned vehicle exploded on impact at the company's test site in the U.S. state of Texas. However, the firm's founder, Elon Musk, was upbeat about the performance of his Starship spacecraft. The BBC's Gareth Barlow is with me in the studio for more on this. Gareth, tell us more about this latest SpaceX launch. It's an interesting craft.
Yes, the Starship is the firm's latest venture and will become its main focus going forwards. It's a development on the Falcon 9 rocket, which has been hugely successful in taking crew and cargo to the International Space Station, for example. And what the Falcon 9 did was pioneer the reusability of these rockets. They go up into space and then come back down again, boosters first, slow the descent, they land on the pad, you then go and refurbish them, reuse them. It makes space exploration much more cost effective. Well, the Starship does something similar, but rather than come down bottom first, it does a belly flop and then comes down parallel to the ground. So if you think of a pen, rather than it coming down tip down or kind of the rubber end down, it comes down parallel. And then just a few hundred meters before the pad, it flips around, its boosters slow its descent, and it lands smoothly. That's what's supposed to happen. Today's test in Texas, it reached about 12.5 kilometers in altitude, 41,000 feet, roughly where airliners fly, does the belly flop, comes down, uses its fins and stabilizers, which hopefully give it a more controlled and accurate descent, but it hit the pad too quickly and, like you say, exploded on impact. But SpaceX and Elon Musk, hugely excited by the amount of data that they can pull from this. We're all told as kids, aren't we? You only learn by making mistakes. And what they'll now do is feed this in to the next prototype and hopefully then use it to get to both the moon and also to Mars.
So is that the objective for Starship when it's finally approved for missions?
Yes, so Elon Musk has said he wants to get people to Mars by 2026, a hugely ambitious target, but he's set ambitious targets in the past and has achieved them. He has also been asked by NASA to explore using the craft to get people to the moon as well. And this all comes on the day that NASA revealed the 18 astronauts that it plans to send to the moon under its Artemis program from the year 2024 going forwards.
Gareth Barlow, thank you. And now with the latest sports news, here's Joe Parsons.
Thank you. One of Italy's most famous footballers, Paolo Rossi, has died at the age of 64 after a long illness. Rossi was one of the stars of the Italy side that won the 1982 World Cup in Spain. His 6 goals, 3 of which were scored against Brazil, made him the tournament's top scorer. Rossi, who had a successful career at Juventus, nearly missed the World Cup after being banned from football for 2 years for his involvement in a match-fixing scandal. The European Cup winners, the 13-time European Cup winners, Real Madrid, are through to the knockout stage of the European Champions League after starting the final round of matches with their hopes of progressing in the balance. But a 2-0 win over Borussia Mönchengladbach has put them through, as John Bennett reports.
In his 2 spells as Real Madrid head coach, Zinedine Zidane has gained a reputation for delivering when it really matters. It's more than likely that he would have lost his job had Real missed out on a 24th successive qualification for the knockout stages, but his side never looked like letting him down against Mönchengladbach. 2 unstoppable Karim Benzema headers gave Real a 2-0 lead at half-time. Second half, he was inches away from a hat-trick when he hit the bar. That result meant that whoever won the other game in the group would join Real Madrid in the last 16. Inter Milan dominated against Shakhtar Donetsk, but couldn't find a breakthrough. Lautaro Martinez wasted a number of great opportunities. So for the 3rd season in a row, the Italian giants go out in the group stage.
Elsewhere, Atletico Madrid have joined the holders and group winners Bayern Munich in the knockout phase with a 2-0 win over Red Bull Salzburg in their group. And Atalanta go through from their pool along with Liverpool, who'd already clinched top spot after a 1-0 win over Ajax in Amsterdam. Group C had already been settled with Manchester City clinching top spot ahead of Porto. And PSG beat Istanbul Başakşehir 5-1 in the match that had to be completed last night after both teams walked off the pitch on Tuesday after a match official was accused of using a racist term towards a member of the Başakşehir coaching staff. The Turkish club alleged that the Romanian 4th official, Sebastian Colescu, made a racist comment towards their assistant coach, Pierre Webu. The former Cameroon international striker, Patrick Soufo, is Pierre Webu's cousin. Soufo has told the BBC World Service that he's proud of how his cousin reacted.
I think he did very well. I think not only him, but also all the players from both teams, they handled the situation very, very well. They made sure that nobody is singled out, so they chose to lead the pitch themselves. I mean, all together. So he was very, very, very proud.
Patrick Soufo, and that's the sport.
Joe Parsons, thank you. And now David has some other stories from our news desk.
The former king of Spain, Juan Carlos, who's been living in the United Arab Emirates since August in the wake of investigations into his finances, has settled a tax bill worth more than $800,000. His lawyers, who gave no details on what the taxes were for, said the bill covered interest and fines. Spain's Supreme Court is investigating Juan Carlos' business dealings, including some linked to a high-speed rail contract in Saudi Arabia. A humpback whale has been caught on camera in front of the Statue of Liberty and other New York landmarks. Pictures of the marine mammal were captured by a photographer who runs a local boat company, and the sighting was confirmed by the US Coast Guard. The US Atlantic coast is a migration route for the whales, and in recent years more than a dozen have been seen in New York waters. And the British jazz pop star Jamie Cullum has broken the Guinness World Record for the largest music lesson ever held. During the virtual piano lesson, he taught 2,282 members of the public how to play the Christmas Carol in the bleak midwinter.
Thanks, David. Now to Australia, where experts say one of the country's most loved animals, the koala, is living on the brink. Climate change, destruction of habitat, and Australia's recent bushfires have left them struggling to survive. The government's now announced funding for a national audit of koalas. But how exactly do you count these solitary creatures in such a vast landscape? With the answer, here's Dr. Roman Crutescu, a koala ecologist from the University of the Sunshine Coast in Australia.
We are, as ecologists, faced with the difficult, looking for a needle in a haystack. We have that little grey ball of fur in the tree, very quiet most of the time, doesn't move. It's not like a monkey jumping from branch to branch. And to be honest, when we just look with our own eyes, we miss most of them, about 80%. So we're throwing everything at it because it's such a difficult, survey. So we are helped by our dogs. So we train detection dogs. They sniff koala poo or scats. And the reason we do that is that everywhere koala live, they poo. And us ecologists, we love poo because it's, stay in the environment for a while, and koala poo a lot, about 100 little pellets every day. So that's much easier for us to find. And with the detection dog, because they've got such great nose, they, zoom in and across the bush, and then they find the poo, they drop, they tell us, here it is, and then we play with them and we record that data. So that's great for koala habitat mapping. And then we take it to the air, and we have heat-seeking drones that actually look for the animal itself. So, the beauty of it is because it's in the air, we don't have to walk the whole area, difficult terrain, and we just cover, many square kilometers and just look at them like a hot little bubble, if you want, in a tree.
Dr. Roman Crutescu speaking there from Australia. Reminder now of our main news. U.S. regulators have launched a major lawsuit against Facebook, accusing it of buying WhatsApp and Instagram to stifle competition. That's all from us. You've been listening to The Newsroom.
Next on the BBC World Service, we're on assignment, and then in 30 minutes, it's Outlook.
Back in the 70s in the US, many secretaries felt like they were somewhere between a wife and a waitress for the boss. Sick of the way they were being treated, they decided to fight for their rights. And along the way, inspired a hit movie and a legendary song.
At HGMT, it's The Inquiry.
This week, the French Parliament is discussing tougher laws to tackle what President Macron called Islamist separatism and to reinforce the country's secular values. We're asking, has French secularism gone too far?
At 10 GMT, it's The Forum. Here's Bridget Kendall.
The Egyptian singer Kulthum was a powerful performer and strong supporter of pan-Arab nationalism. In her heyday, she enthralled audiences both in Egypt and across the Middle East. So how did she manage to capture so many hearts?
That's all still to come here on the BBC World Service.
Welcome to Assignment. I'm Ed Butler, and today I've been hearing some dramatic first-hand accounts from Syrian men who say they were recruited to fight as mercenaries in the recent conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh in the Caucasus. UN experts and rights groups believe as many as 2,000 were recruited by Azerbaijan in that war, claims denied by the Azeri government. Their stories and the traumatic impact they say the war has had on them after the news.
BBC News with David Harper. The The United States has recorded more than 3,000 deaths from the coronavirus in the past 24 hours, the highest so far in a single day anywhere in the world. The latest landmark comes as coronavirus cases continue to surge in the US. Hospitals in various parts of the country are filling up, particularly in California, where admissions have risen by more than 70% in the past 2 weeks. US regulators have sued Facebook, saying the company is abusing its dominance in social media to crush smaller competitors. Antitrust officials called for Facebook to be broken up by being ordered to divest Instagram and WhatsApp. Britain and the European Union have agreed to continue trying for a few more days to reach a post-Brexit trade deal. After face-to-face talks between the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, both sides said large gaps remained between them. President-elect Joe Biden's son, Hunter, has said he's under investigation for potential tax violations. In a statement released by the presidential transition team, Hunter Biden said he was confident a review would demonstrate that he'd handled his affairs legally. The electoral authorities in Ghana have declared that President Nana Akufo-Addo has won a second term after defeating his long-term rival John Mahama in Monday's election. Mr. Mahama's NDC party has rejected the result and says it will appeal against it. The Saudi-led coalition fighting in Yemen says it has destroyed 2 bomb-laden boats south of the Red Sea. The coalition said the vessels were launched from the Yemeni city of Hodeidah by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels. An experimental rocket belonging to Elon Musk's SpaceX company has exploded while attempting to land back on the ground. The 16-story high Starship rocket was being tested as part of the company's plans to eventually carry humans and cargo to the Moon and Mars. It had made a successful liftoff from SpaceX's launch facility in Texas. BBC News.
A couple of months ago, this video appeared online. It shows a group of Syrian men apparently in an Azerbaijani compound. They're clapping, dancing, posing for the camera with V for victory signs. They're wearing military fatigues. What's your message to the boys back in Syria, asks one. You're all welcome here, another replies. Come, join us. It did look like a good opportunity.
They told us our mission would be to serve as sentries on the border, as peacekeepers. They offered $2,000 a month. It felt like a fortune to us.
I'm Ed Butler, and in today's edition of Assignment, I'm going to be hearing for the first time some of the voices of the men who made this mission to Azerbaijan in the Caucasus. It's a story that's received little attention because it seems there has been an effort to keep it secret. Through a series of trusted contacts, I've been speaking to 4 of these men via text or phone interview. They've spoken out, it seems, at some considerable risk to their own safety. They didn't know it, but their supposed mission to work as border guards was a lie. They were walking straight into the front line of a war, and within weeks, hundreds of them would be dead.
Heavy fighting between Armenia and Azerbaijan has continued for another day in the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh. It comes as the
Azeri forces continuing their advance in footage released by the authorities here.
Between Azerbaijan and Armenia over the disputed territory of Nagorno-Karabakh is in its 9th day. Both sides have accused each other of attacking.
The war between Azerbaijan and Armenia in Nagorno-Karabakh began to make global headlines at the end of September, although in fact it had been rumbling for years at a low level. The disputed enclave high in the Caucasus Mountains had originally fallen under Armenian control back in the 1990s. A bloody war then had left tens of thousands dead, hundreds of thousands displaced. Azerbaijan argued the territory was stolen and the international community never recognized Armenia's rule. The bitterness on both sides ran deep. But this year, sensing its own military superiority, Azerbaijan decided it was time to reassert its claims, and it wasn't leaving anything to chance.
So the first indication that I have for recruitment was in early August.
That's Elizabeth Tsurkov. She's a fellow at the Center for Global Policy in Washington, D.C., and a Syria specialist who's done as much as anyone to research the use of mercenaries in the conflict.
At the time, Syrians reached out to me and told me, have you heard about this recruitment to Azerbaijan? I said, this makes absolutely no sense. You must be mistaken. No, we're signing up to go to Azerbaijan. I couldn't understand how that would make sense. But, it turned out that war was being prepared.
This is one of them. I'm not going to tell you his name. His story is consistent with others, but like all of the men I spoke to for this program, he feared reprisals from former military commanders if he revealed his identity.
I am from Hama province. I have 3 children. I was a university student before the revolution, but I had to drop out when the revolution started. I joined the Free Syrian Army. I fought in many battles in Hama and Idlib. The area that I was born in has since been taken over by the regime. Like all Syrians, my financial situation is dire. We're poor. We'll take anything just to survive. In August, when rumors started to spread about the offer of work in Azerbaijan, I decided to sign up. We gathered at the Turkey border crossing. They registered our names and we were transported by Turkish military buses to Gaziantep airport. Then we flew to Istanbul. Then we were moved by military plane to Baku.
How he travelled to Azerbaijan is significant. It echoes what all the men say. They were hired by the Turkish-backed Syrian rebel militia, also known as the Syrian National Army, and they travelled under Turkish military supervision.
The total number of Syrian recruits was between 1,500 and 2,000. Fewer than a third of us had any real military experience.
This seems odd, doesn't it? Why would Turkey and Azerbaijan recruit inexperienced men with no knowledge of the conflict in question? Here's Elizabeth Tsurkov.
First of all, the Syrian fighters, they are extremely desperate. So they're willing to go and risk their lives for salaries that are 20, 30, 40 times higher than their salary back home. As opposed to kind of maybe the typical image of a mercenary with very high levels of expertise, like ex-Green Berets or people like that. Syrians, it's completely different. They are not good fighters. There is even footage of them from Azerbaijan, firing with Kalashnikovs without even looking at the targets, just completely random fire. At the end of the day, they're militia groups, They are essentially just people to whom you can strap a Kalashnikov and told, go fight, go capture that hill, go capture that forest.
Now, it has been alleged that some of the Syrians travelling to Azerbaijan may have been motivated by radical Islamist ideology. Azerbaijan, after all, is a Muslim country. Armenia is Christian. But there's very little evidence to support this idea. For each of the men I spoke to, the experience of finding themselves not on sentry duty, as advertised, but in the midst of a war, seems to have been quite overwhelming. You may find some of their accounts distressing.
We arrived at Baku airport and we were driven by truck until we reached a military base. My first battle began the next day. I and about 30 guys were sent to the front line. The weather was cloudy. It was early morning. We walked about 50 meters when suddenly a rocket landed near us. I threw myself onto the ground. The shelling lasted for 30 minutes non-stop. Those minutes felt like years.
Alhamdulillah. Oh, Ya Rab Sallam. Ya Rab Sallam. Ya Rab Sallam. Ya Rab Sallam.
The bombardment was intense. This video, posted in early October, shows a soldier independently identified from the Turkish-backed Hamza division filming himself in a bunker. You can hear the terror in his voice as the shells fall.
Ay Barud. الله أكبر نصر عنيف الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر بطح.
You can imagine the experience for those caught on open ground, unfamiliar with battle. This man told me he'd never used a gun before.
We didn't know what to do, how to react. I saw men dying, others getting injured, and others who just went running around like crazy people. They didn't have any sense of where they were going because they were basically civilians. No weapons, training, nothing.
So that was just your first day on the front line. What happened after that?
When the shelling started, I used this communication device, this walkie-talkie thing. I hardly knew how to use it. I was speaking to our commander. I said we needed an ambulance. There were so many injured and killed. And that guy just started to swear at me, all kinds of terrible words. I ended up throwing the walkie-talkie away and walked on my own for 10 kilometers to where we left